When people think about leaders of the X-Men, Cyclops is understandably the character that comes to mind for the vast majority of people, and deservedly so. He was more or less groomed for the role, and during the Utopia era of the X-Men, he proved that he could be depended on to ensure mutant kind survival. For all his brilliance as a tactician, there's been at least one other X-Men leader worth talking about, and they're notably one of the few people Cyclops has willingly ceded power to: Aurora Monroe, the mutant best known as Storm. Created by Len Wein and Dave Cockrum for Giant-Sized X-Men, Aurora was born in New York City to a Kenyan princess with magic in her bloodline and a photojournalist from America, but they soon relocated to Egypt. Sadly, this budding family was ripped away from her when a plane crashed into her family's house as a child, killing her parents. Aurora survived the incident but was trapped under the rubble of her home with her mother's corpse nearby, instilling a deep-seated case of claustrophobia that remained with her well into adulthood. With nothing but the clothes on her back and a family heirloom, she wandered the streets of Cairo until she was taken in by a local gang of thieves who raised her. The clan's leader taught her the ways of pickpocketing and thievery, and she became the pride of the Thieves clan. She attempted to pickpocket one man in particular, but that man was a certain telepathic mutant who saw the attempt coming. He noticed that she was a mutant whose powers hadn't manifested yet, but kept that knowledge to himself. As a preteen, she began a trip south of Cairo, brought upon by an unexplainable inner desire to do so. She faced many dangers, such as a man that attempted to force himself on her, which forced her to kill him in self-defense. This encounter rattled her to the extent that she swore to never take another life, a vow that would be challenged multiple times in her adult life. She also crossed paths and spent time with a certain Wakandan prince also in his youth. It was during this journey, during a near-death experience in the middle of the Sahara, that Storm's powers manifested for the first time, the ability to psionically manipulate the weather and atmosphere. As of this video's publication, she's currently considered to be an Omega-level mutant. Omega-level mutants are, simply put, mutants with no measurable upper limits to their power set. There's only a few known in the Marvel Universe, and there's a bunch to unpack there, so I'll save that for another time, since I have a cooler character in mind to expand on that with. Her powers include the ability to summon large thunderstorms, hailstorms, tornadoes, flash freeze things, and so much more. She's considered one of the most powerful mutants on the planet, and for very good reason. Storm was actually very notably based on unused designs for several characters Dave Cockrum created but never used for the Legion of Superheroes during his time at DC Comics. Nightcrawler was also a similar case, being a design Cockrum had come up with long before he got into the comic industry. As mentioned earlier, Storm has led the X-Men for long stints on several occasions, the most famous being in the 80s after beating Cyclops in combat for the right to lead the team. Especially notable in that Storm had actually lost her powers at that point in time, but still pulled out the win. Where Scott as a leader tends to operate based on pragmatism, efficiency, and later down the line outright survival, Aurora leads more with compassion and empathy, a stark but effective contrast that served her and the team she's led well. That's not to say she's a pacifist or anything. She can and will throw down if the situation calls for it, even breaking her vow on killing in a few instances. Most of the people involved got better though. Though Storm has always been one of the most popular X-Men, in recent years, she's gained even more prominence as one of the headlining characters of the now concluded Krakoa era, terraforming the planet Mars and helping christen it as the planet Arakko, serving as its leader. Speaking of leading, Storm also became leader of the Morlocks after defeating their former leader Callisto in battle. Though she's pretty much never around due to her X-Men obligations, when Morlock matters end up being escalated to her, she usually tackles them personally. Storm's power and beauty is often only matched by the respect she commands throughout the Marvel Universe. Dracula infamously sought to make her his bride, and she's notably on the very short list of heroes Dr. Doom openly respects and has even tried to court. Storm being one of the most well-known characters in Marvel made her an absolute shoo-in for Capcom's Marvel Fighters, making her debut in 1994's X-Men Children of the Atom, sporting her iconic 1990s Jim Lee redesign. She's voiced in the Capcom Fighters up to Marvel vs. Capcom 2 by Catherine Disher, who notably voiced Jean Grey in X-Men the Animated Series. She also voiced Psylocke and Spyro in the Marvel Fighters as well, though her most well-known Capcom performance is as Jill Valentine in Resident Evil 3 and Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Storm is a character with a ton of history in the Versus games, but before we get to that, I actually want to talk about one of the most important people associated with the X-Men. Storm is a character that's had two really strong stretches of great writing over the years. Al Ewing's recent work on the character has been some of the best Storm stuff in years and is definitely worth checking out. But I want to highlight the person that did the most establishing character work for her by far. They're not the writer that created her, but the one responsible for making Storm the wildly compelling character she is in the first place, and as it so happens, they're the best X-Men writer to ever take up the pen. The fun thing about comic books is seeing new readers get into the medium, and it's pretty common for people to take an interest in a character and ask others, hey, where's the best place to start reading if I want to learn more about this person? Because of the perpetual and never-ending nature of mainstream comic books, you might get a wide range of suggestions depending on the character. Everyone from Lee Ditko, Roger Stern, or Dan Slott for Spider-Man, Frank Miller, Brian Michael Bendis, or Ann Nocenti for Daredevil, the list goes on. When it comes to X-Men though, things get a little funny. The X-Men in general have probably some of the most dense lore of any of the most front-facing Marvel properties out there, and there's a lot to digest. Yet, in spite of that, if anyone asks where to start with X-Men, the answer is almost unanimously one thing in particular. Start with the Chris Claremont run. You very rarely see such a solid consensus for, well, anything among comic book fans, and that's a testament to how important his run on X-Men was to not just Marvel, but comic books in general. Chris Claremont joined Marvel in 1969 as an editorial assistant. He initially didn't have too much of an interest in the comic industry at first, having studied acting and political science in college. His first writing gig at Marvel was an issue of Daredevil, and he'd soon after work with who'd become his most well-known collaborator, John Byrne, on Iron Fist's original solo series, creating characters for that run such as Sabretooth in the process. He'd go on to get a full-time position at Marvel, and editor-in-chief Len Wein, who'd recently written Giant Size X-Men with Dave Cockrum and created characters like Storm, Colossus, and Nightcrawler, tapped Claremont to take over the X-Men comic with the new status quo established in Giant Sized X-Men. To add some context here, X-Men Tales had been in the toilet for several years at this point. The series was effectively on indefinite hiatus, with issues 67 through 93 being all reprints of older X-Men stories. Giant Size X-Men reinvigorated interest in the brand, and we noticed that Claremont expressed interest in the new characters created. Claremont started with X-Men issue 94 in August of 1975, and would mark the beginning of one of the longest, most critically acclaimed runs in Western comic history, serving as the lead writer of the book until 1991. Claremont's approach to writing was a unique one. He used his perspective as someone that studied acting to flesh out character motivations and overarching plot threads in excruciating detail. It's often said that X-Men books are the comic book equivalent of soap operas, and Claremont's run is often seen as the primary reason for that, honestly, pretty true perception. Claremont's commitment to fleshing out these characters made the X-Men stories he told incredibly popular, boosting the brand in notoriety to the extent that it became Marvel's biggest pillar outside of Spider-Man. The degree of seriousness with which he took the characters is often credited as one of the first big shifts in the industry towards more sophisticated storytelling. Moreover, almost every single thing people probably like about X-Men today either comes directly from, is informed by, or was written by someone inspired by Claremont's tenure on the book. It cannot be overstated just how much this single run has shaped the franchise as we know it today. Among other things, he's the writer responsible for taking Wolverine from that scrappy Canadian dude that fought the Hulk once to the mysterious, brooding badass with loads of hidden depth that we know him as today. He's the person that slowly transformed Storm from a naive outsider in a hostile world to a confident, self-assured leader and one of the most respected characters in comics. And that's to say nothing of the legendary stories he's worked on for both Uncanny X-Men and the spin-off books he's established. The Brood Saga, Inferno, Fall of the Mutants, Wolverine's original solo series, the Demon Bear Saga from New Mutants. Just to give you an idea of how insanely influential this run is, I want to highlight the stretch of issues starting from 98 until the early 140s. Issue 98 features the first appearance of the Sentinels in this new status quo and is itself a great multi-issue story. But the end of that arc marks the transformation of Jean Grey into the Phoenix and starts a slowly building long-form story under the surface that eventually pops off at issue 129 with what's probably the most influential and celebrated X-Men storyline of all time, the Dark Phoenix saga. But just when you think things couldn't get any more legendary, just a mere 4 issues later, readers were hit with arguably the second most iconic X-Men story of all time, the 2-part Days of Future Past. And while his large, bombastic stories and equally large, verbose walls of dialogue are part of what makes his X-Men run so memorable to this day, for better or worse, I think a big part of what makes it stand out is his willingness to use this team of mutants to tackle real-world issues. The X-Men and mutant kind in general are very much extraordinary characters in a world that very explicitly and very violently does not want them, and this is a resolute fact that informs most of the conflict throughout X-Men stories, and Claremont's run is one of the most plainly obvious examples of that. Some examples include Nightcrawler's devotion to his faith and how it stands at odds with the violence he must endure to survive as a mutant, Magneto's evolution from a powerful but generic supervillain to arguably one of the most layered, sympathetic comic book characters of all time. And hell, just about everything involving God loves me and kills. Claremont's voice for these characters and the conflicts they represent have a thoughtfulness to them matched only by how disappointingly relevant a lot of those same conflicts still are today, if not more so. Though he'd end his otherwise uninterrupted until that point run on the book in 1991, he still comes back to the brand every now and then, and has even written other books for Marvel afterwards, like Fantastic Four, notably being involved in the creation of Valeria Richards, the second child of Reed Richards and Sue Storm. Claremont pretty rightfully gets his due these days as the architect of what's generally known and loved about the X-Men, but I wanted to highlight him here too, since a lot of the characters he created or co-created have ended up in Marvel vs. Capcom, and it'd feel wrong to not eventually talk about him. Here's to you, Mr. Claremont. All that said, let's get into Storm's first appearance in X-Men Children of the Atom. Storm is a veritable goddess of the elements, and that appropriately translates to a pretty cool moveset overall, being able to rush down as well as keep distance from the opponent effectively. Storm's a pretty interesting character in Children of the Atom due to some design quirks as well as general engine oddities. She has the best mobility in the game by far. She can interestingly shake off of stun thanks to a weird property of lightning attack. She has a really good dash with invulnerability in its startup frames, and her ground game in general is pretty decent. Her mobility doesn't really help her to get openings though. She can't take too many hits overall because of her low health, and she has a somewhat steep learning curve, especially for her most optimal setups. Before we get into her special moves, Storm has a few quirks worth talking about in Children of the Atom specifically, and they inform some of the ways she can be played at a higher level. Storm's jumping medium punch is a small spherical projectile. Having projectiles as normals isn't too crazy in this game. Cyclops' heavy punch is a notable example, but Storm's is interesting in that it can actually be aimed. Normally, it shoots straight ahead, but if you hold down or up, it'll actually go diagonally in the same direction as well. Storm's dash also uniquely has frames of animation during its startup that are invulnerable. With some proper wave dashing, Storm can actually make her grounded dashes essentially invincible. Storm also has the ability to stand cancel her crouching light kick. Think of it as the opposite of crouch canceling. Instead of canceling your normal with a crouch, you instead return the stick or pad to neutral during a crouching normal. If you did it right, you should see the opponent still get hit by the attack, but it'll look like Storm did nothing at all because of the animation cancel. This actually has some practical application in combos both simple and advanced, as it allows her to link moves she wouldn't normally be able to otherwise. For example, Storm can link together 3 crouching light kicks, stand canceling the third one, and then combo that into lightning attack when normally she's not able to combine those lights in the lightning attack at all. When you get knocked down as Storm, if you do a quarter circle forward and a kick button motion, Storm will do an invincible quick rise. You will know you did it right if you briefly see a window around her as she rises from the ground. Storm also has the ability to float by holding up in the air during a jump. This massively slows her descent and can be used as a stall tactic, as well as fishing for attacks with a few of her aerial normals. Storm's first special move is Whirlwind, done with a quarter circle forward and punch. This is a projectile that travels across the ground, its speed dependent on the strength of the punch button pressed. It can also be done in the air as well. Her second special move is Lightning Attack, done with a punch and kick button of the same strength.
Lightning attack! Lightning attack!
Storm charges forward with a Spear of Lightning in front of her. This attack can be aimed in any of the 8 available directions, and doing the input in additional time has Storm follow up with another one. This also interacts with Storm's dizzy state in a weird way. If you're stunned as Storm, from the moment the dizzy animation starts, if you use Lightning Attack, she'll completely break free of the stun. That said, it's not a foolproof get out of jail free card, and there definitely is counterplay for it, especially from characters like Omega Red. Exercise awareness. She can combine this attack with Whirlwind and her float to stay in the air pretty much indefinitely. Doing 2 upwards lightning attacks into her Whirlwind and repeating that sequence, using her float to reposition herself if necessary, is a legitimate runaway tactic in here, and one she'd come to be known for in the Versus games. That said, it's only kind of effective as a meter building tactic here. It's much more effective in the later Versus games. Keep in mind that she can also be sniped out of the air by aware enough players as well. Storm's first unique X power here is Wind Control. This move allows Storm to move the opponent towards or away from her with a burst of wind. The push version is a quarter circle forwards and all 3 kick buttons, and the pull version is a quarter circle back and all 3 kick buttons. Storm notably loses this move in pretty much every Versus game after this, with one notable exception. More on that later. Storm can naturally take flight by doing a quarter circle back motion and hitting all 3 punches. Flight doesn't serve her in Children of the Atom as well as it does in later games, but Storm wouldn't be Storm without this. Storm, like Sentinel, can be put into a block stun infinite by certain characters if she flies too closely to the ground. Storm's first hyper combo is Lightning Storm, done with a quarter circle forward and 2 punches. This is a fairly straightforward super that has Storm discharge electricity that fans out in multiple directions, hitting multiple times as it leaves the screen. This is the hyper combo you'll generally be wanting to use as Storm the most. Her second hyper combo is Hailstorm, done with a quarter circle forward and start. This move does a ton of chip damage and lasts for a really long time, but you'd also have to be completely unaware of how this move works or kind of not good at the game in general to actually get hit by it. I'd argue most people seeing this move today probably know it from being one of the easiest ways to get the 50 hits trophy in the Marvel vs. Capcom collection. Storm's stage in Children of the Atom is on the Blackbird. As the name suggests, the stage takes place on the back of the Blackbird, the X-Men's private aircraft. It looks to be parked on an aircraft carrier itself, though whose carrier it is, I have no idea. The Blackbird debuted in issue 104 of Uncanny X-Men, specifically noted to be one of a set of 2. The Blackbird was apparently somehow obtained by Xavier from S.H.I.E.L.D. after the X-Men's previous aircraft, the Stratojet, was destroyed in battle. The visual design of the aircraft itself is based off of the Lockheed SR-71 aircraft, a stealth craft also named the Blackbird. The fictional Blackbird specifically is drawn larger to accommodate more passengers. Due to the crazy nature of your everyday X-Men missions, the Blackbird often got nearly, if not outright destroyed many times, usually requiring heavy repairs. Over time, the plane would get various upgrades, like an onboard version of Cerebro, Xavier's mutant locating device. Only the Blackbird version could be used by non-telepaths. Xavier would later have Forge make upgrades to the ship, like a cloaking device that used Shi'ar technology. There's an entire fleet of Blackbirds that's kept on hand, though these days it's called the X-Jet now, a name actually borrowed from the original X-Men movie, who used a design similar to the original Lockheed SR-71 model. I have a vivid memory as a kid of watching the first X-Men movie with my father, a comic book fan, and he got visibly excited at that sequence in the first movie where the jet appears. I asked him what the big deal was. It was just a plane after all. He turned to me and said, "I'm just happy to have lived long enough to see this in an actual movie." And as someone that makes entirely too long videos about comic book characters in video games today, I finally get what you mean, Dad. You're probably wondering, where do they even park this thing? Don't worry, I'll touch on that a little later. This stage isn't as intricately designed as some of the other stages in the game, its most defining features being the seagulls that occasionally fly across the top of the screen and the beautiful sunset on the horizon. What's particularly notable about this stage, however, is that there's 3 variants. The standard sunset variant, one with a pinkish tint that I presume is meant to represent dawn, and a blue-hued one that seems to be evening time. There's no major changes other than the general color tone, but it's a really cool thing to add for the stage. It's entirely random which one you'll get, so it's always fun to see which one pops up in arcade mode. There's what seems to be another aircraft on the carrier to the right, though I can't make out too many details. In my opinion, the standout element of this stage by far is the music. And can we talk about this theme for a bit? I've already gushed about my favorite theme in Capcom's Marvel Fighters, the Marvel 1 rendition of Captain America's theme. But holy shit, this theme is like an outstandingly close second for me. From the moment this track starts, you're blasted with some powerful orchestra hits with a piano sample backing it up. I've always loved this part in particular because each orchestra hit almost feels like its own melodic bolt of lightning striking, and that fits the character like a glove. The intro transitions into the synth-led main melody, with that really distinctive 90s Capcom guitar sample eventually coming in during the bridge. I know saying this song sounds Capcom as hell is a really weak way to quantify a track's vibe, but there's just something about this song in particular that really does evoke the best of Capcom's arcade sound in the 90s. In this music enjoyer's humble opinion though, this track's secret sauce is the absolutely bug-nuts bonkers percussion that plays whenever the lead synth melody isn't playing. Seriously, just listen to this shit. It's just goddamn, it's so good. I also love the compositional detail of the percussion sample used here being a bongo. Pretty classy touch for a Storm theme. Alright, I'm sure y'all are tired of hearing me glaze this song, but honestly, it really is one of Capcom's best, at least as far as their fighting games go. This one was composed by Isao Abe, best known as the composer of Sagat's theme in Street Fighter 2. He also did Wolverine and Omega Red's theme in this game as well. Here are Storm's colors. And here's Storm's ending. Storm returns in the first Versus series game proper, X-Men vs Street Fighter. Her sprite's been recolored a bit to more accurately resemble her Jim Lee design, which is nice. Storm's back in action for X-Men vs Street Fighter, and she's notably a better character. Her mobility is still top tier. Hailstorm is faster and thankfully more usable than in Children of the Atom. She has a comically easy stun combo in the corner, seriously it takes like a minute to learn, and she can build meter incredibly quickly, especially compared to Children of the Atom. She does have somewhat atypical air chains though, you have to specifically work around her jumping medium punch attack, and she's still not quite newcomer friendly. Storm's theme in this game was composed by Yuko Takahara, who composed Rogue's, Cyclops, and Wolverine's themes in this game. I think the song is pretty good, but the Children of the Atom song remains my favorite. Big fan of the more brass-led melody here though. Storm's interesting in that she retains most of her moves from Children of the Atom, but their inputs or their general utility have been adjusted. First off is Whirlwind. The input is the same as in Children of the Atom, but she now fires 3 whirlwinds when you do the move. An interesting little quirk with this incarnation of the move is that if you Tiger Knee it, it'll momentarily stall her upwards momentum, but then resume it as soon as the move ends. Lightning Attack is also adjusted similarly to Wolverine's Drill Claw in this game, in that instead of being initiated by pressing a punch and kick of the same strength, you now press Light Kick and Medium Punch. Kind of a negligible change on arcade layouts, but good luck adjusting if you play on pad. Notably, she can also use this move consecutively up to 3 times now.
Lightning attack! Lightning attack!
Storm also has a pretty easy stun combo in the corner involving Lightning Attack on medium-sized characters. Simply throw the opponent in the corner, and when they pop up, jump and throw them again. It'll actually combo. As soon as the throw ends, Lightning Attack into the opponent once or twice, and congrats, they're probably stunned. If for whatever reason they aren't, it usually only takes hitting them once right after to do so. She can still combine this move with her float to camp in the air and build meter, and it's way more effective here than in Children of the Atom. Double Typhoon is a new move, done with a quarter circle back and punch.
Typhoon!
Good.
Typhoon!
Good.
Storm pauses for a second before summoning a large, towering set of Typhoons. The startup on this is slow, but it does have some minimal tracking. The opponent can just walk away if they see it coming though. Storm still retains her ability to fly from Children of the Atom as well. Hailstorm is now done with a quarter circle back and 2 punches. Notably, it doesn't have the ridiculous startup that it had in Children of the Atom, though it also has a drastically shorter duration as well. Here are Storm's colors in the arcade version. And here are her exclusive colors in the Sega Saturn version. And here's Storm's ending. Storm sits out the next 2 Marvel vs. games in a playable capacity, but there's still some things I want to talk about before we move on to Marvel 2. While characters don't specifically have assigned stages in the Versus games, there's at least one stage that somewhat calls back to Children of the Atom, Code Red, which takes place on top of the Blackbird just like in that game. Instead of being parked on an aircraft carrier though, Code Red features what looks like the sequence the X-Men used to transport the Blackbird from its underground hangar to ground level, where it will presumably take off after the fight. The stage starts off with some screens lit up in the background that start moving, presumably to simulate the perspective of the Blackbird being rotated. It then begins scrolling to the right and enters a tunnel. There's all kinds of wiring and alert signs on the wall in the background. I can't imagine this was cheap to construct. It begins to scroll diagonally as well as we start moving further to ground level. At one point it stops and begins moving straight upwards and up to ground level, where it seems to be situated on a mostly empty lot. Around this time in the comics, if my memory serves me right, the Blackbird was stored in a hangar directly under the X-Mansion's basketball court, so this kinda tracks. Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, like every other stage in that game, reuses stages from X-Men vs. Street Fighter wholesale, though Code Red probably has the most inventive repurposing of assets. Instead of the ship being prepared for takeoff, the entire sequence is played backwards instead, to show the craft being taken back to the hangar. It's a small but really smart way to make the stage feel new. The stage now starts in the ground level lot area, and it's sunset instead of a clear blue sky now. Everything else is largely the same, just happening in reverse more or less. Storm also has a cameo in this game as one of the captured characters in Apocalypse's pods during the sub-boss fight against him. She also appears in Marvel vs. Capcom as one of several Marvel assists in the game. She does a typhoon attack, though it's notably a little different than the one she had in X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Notably, it's using a slightly recolored version of Mega Man's Tornado Hold sprite instead of her original Double Typhoon sprite. To always ensure a selection, hold Start, Light Punch, Heavy Punch, and Light Kick during assist selection. Hey, let's talk comic recs for a bit. So, Storm, despite her popularity, didn't get a spotlight for some of the 90s and most of the 2000s. In fact, it's really only been the last decade or so where she's come into prominence again. There's a 2014 miniseries written by Greg Pak that's pretty decent and easy to jump into. Pretty much any of Al Ewing's work on her in the last few years has been stellar, and I'd argue he's the best writer Storm's had since Claremont. I mentioned Sword earlier, but she really shines in the 2022 volume of X-Men Red, which is basically a sequel book to Sword. She has an ongoing series right now written by Murewa Ayodele that's been following her post-Krakoa exploits that also serves as a great jumping on point, especially now that she's an official Avenger. And honestly, if you do decide to read Chris Claremont's Uncanny run, and I wholeheartedly recommend that, she's incredibly prominent there. And around halfway through the run, she pretty much becomes the closest thing the book has to a lead character. That said, there's one Claremont Storm story in particular I want to focus on. One, because it's more easily digestible, being only 2 issues, and 2, because it's one of the best Storm stories ever written. This one's actually a little more prominent in public consciousness thanks to being adapted for 2 episodes in X-Men 97. But as nice as that was, the original comic version should absolutely be experienced as well. This video's comic book recommendation is Lifedeath Parts 1 and 2, consisting of Uncanny X-Men issues 186 and 189 by Chris Claremont and Barry Windsor-Smith. Part 1 begins with Storm at one of the lowest points in her life. She's been seemingly depowered after taking a shot from a weapon designed to take away mutant powers meant to hit Rogue. She's accompanied by Forge, who's been nursing her and trying to help her any way he can. While she's initially skeptical of the gestures, she slowly opens up to him. She shares how not having her powers makes her life feel like it has no further meaning, that she's only a shadow of the person she was supposed to be. Forge tries to level with her a bit, relaying his experiences in Vietnam and how it changed him as both a man and a mutant. Though she's still in despair, she finds herself growing closer to Forge, until she learns the truth about the incident that took her powers. The weapon that was used against her was constructed by none other than Forge himself. Storm understandably lashes out at him, and while Forge tries to explain, she's not hearing any of it. Part 2 begins with Storm trekking through Africa, and things begin to take a more spiritual turn here as she sees visions of the ones she loves as an extension of sorts of her current headspace. She comes across a pregnant young woman who is due to deliver any moment now, but isn't in any condition to be walking, let alone giving birth, and she helps escort her back to her village. I'll refrain from giving away where things go from here, especially since it ends differently than the animated adaptation that most people are familiar with, but it's absolutely worth reading. It's a fantastic character examination of Storm, and her beliefs in her value as not only a mutant, but a woman, and how much her powers played into that for her. Chris Claremont was constantly pushing the boundaries of characterization for the characters he wrote, and this is arguably one of the peaks of that for Storm in particular. And I also can't talk about this story without also mentioning the phenomenal cover and interior art by legendary artist Barry Windsor-Smith. He's best known outside of this for his work on Conan the Barbarian's comics in the 70s, as well as the art for the Weapon X series that finally delved into Wolverine's backstory. It's a wonderfully distinct style, and in my opinion, this story would be worse off without it. Definitely give this a read if you are at all interested in the character. It's one of the very best X-Men stories ever written, it gives you a glimpse of Chris Claremont's work at his creative peak, and is only a 2-issue time investment. I highly recommend it. Storm rejoins the playable Marvel roster in Marvel 2 after having sat out the last few games. Marvel 2 Storm is one of the most goated fighting game characters of all time. Let's talk about it. Storm is probably the best overall character in Marvel 2. Opinions may sway between her and Sentinel and differ based on the player and their team composition, but yeah. She can play a legendary runaway game with her float combined with lightning attack, and that goes hand in hand with her meter building being incredible here. But she can also rush you down too, and she's pretty damn good at doing that. All of her assists are honestly pretty fantastic. And she has some of the best DHC synergy in the game, particularly with Hailstorm. She's also Cable's worst nightmare, one of the best things you can say about any character in this game. Honestly, if the question is, can Storm do this effectively? The answer is yes. Yes, she can. Oh, I'm sorry, were you waiting for some cons? Yeah, no, there are none. She's that good. Despite not really getting very many new tools in Marvel 2, a lot of her moveset's been adjusted in a few ways, most of which are beneficial to her. Whirlwind is now done with a quarter circle forward and kick motion instead of punch. Its main utility is its ability to completely ignore projectiles. It's one of the few ways Storm can annoy Cable to death. Double Typhoon is now done with a half circle back and kick. This is still pretty risky because of that startup, but if you pair it with an assist, it works pretty well for combos. Because of the change to medium normals in Marvel 2, Storm's now gained her medium punch as a special move all its own, Lightning Spear. She can still angle them upwards or downwards as well. Lightning attack is essentially the same. Do keep in mind that though she can combo this up to 3 times, it can only be cancelled in the Lightning Storm from the first 2 hits. Speaking of Lightning Storm, this one's now done with a half circle forward and 2 punches. Hailstorm doesn't really have any changes from before, but it deserves to be highlighted for being probably the best super in the game alongside Air Hyper Viper Beam. It's safe, does insane chip, and is pretty much the perfect DHC super to tag her out or bring her in with. Storm's first assist is Whirlwind. Her second assist is Lightning Attack. Her third assist is Double Typhoon. Here are all of Storm's colors. Storm makes her grand re-entrance in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, sporting the more modern version of her original design, first appearing in issue 444 of Uncanny X-Men. Storm is now voiced by Susan Dalian, who also reprises her role as Storm from the Wolverine in the X-Men animated series. She's also notably the English dub voice of Haku in pretty much all English language Naruto media. Storm in Marvel 3 keeps most of her tools from the previous games, but she isn't the meta-defining threat she was in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. Her mobility is still pretty amazing overall. Hailstorm does ridiculously good chip damage, and said chip gets even more ridiculous in X Factor, making her a scary anchor character in certain situations. That said, she has some pretty low damage overall, and that's paired with some low hits done on a lot of her normals, which makes comboing with her a pain. And honestly, she's pretty firmly a runaway character this time around, instead of someone that excels at both rushdown and keep away. Storm's theme in Marvel 3 is an arrangement of her X-Men vs. Street Fighter theme, and in my opinion, one of the best themes in the game, hands down. While I like a majority of Marvel 3's character themes, give or take a handful, this is one of the few arrangements I think actually tops the CPS2 rendition it's remixed from. I think what makes this one particularly fantastic is the way the instrumentation is handled. The strings in the track's intro seem to intentionally invoke the sound of wind, made even more apparent when it speeds up a bit before going into the main melody. It almost makes you think of wind picking up at the beginning of a, well, storm. While the X-Men vs. Street Fighter rendition of this was a slower paced track, the Marvel 3 version is way higher tempo, to the benefit of the song overall. The song itself sounds like a hurricane quickly escalating in intensity over the course of a couple minutes. My favorite bit though, is the additional bridge portion added to the song, something the original didn't actually have. It's the climax that this version of the song builds to, almost like we're heading into the eye of the storm itself. This feeling is underlined by the sound of wind picking up being clearly mixed into this portion of the song as well. Really great attention to detail there. Her Children of the Atom theme is still my favorite Storm song, but this is easily one of the most sensibly done modern arrangements of a CPS2 era Capcom song out there. Storm's general kit stays pretty much intact in Marvel 3, for better or worse. Storm still has Whirlwind done with a quarter circle forward and attack motion. It still retains its fantastic projectile durability from previous games. Storm still keeps Lightning Spear as a special move, even with medium buttons being a thing again.
Lightning Spear!
She notably gets back the 3 variations she had in Children of the Atom and X-Men vs. Street Fighter, as opposed to the 2 she could only use in Marvel 2. Double Typhoon is now a quarter circle and back motion. Still as slow as ever, but it can notably hit OTG, which has some use in combos. Pressing an attack button and special at the same time initiates lightning attack.
Lightning attack!
Yes!
As always, Storm can chain up to 3 of these in a row and can aim it in 8 directions, and unlike Marvel 2, any of the 3 potential hits can be comboed into a super. As always, Storm can fly, though like with every other character, flight time has been drastically reduced from previous games. Ultimate Marvel 3 added 2 special moves for Storm over the vanilla release, the first being Fair Wind.
Fair wind! Fair wind!
This one uses a gust of wind to push the opponent away. This actually applies to KO'd characters as well, meaning you can use it to potentially disrupt the direction the next character comes in from. Foul Wind is the other variation, which pushes the character towards Storm instead.
Foul wind! Foul wind!
These 2 maneuvers are essentially Capcom reinstating her wind control move from Children of the Atom, 14 years after losing the move in X-Men vs. Street Fighter. What a pull. Lightning Storm is done with a quarter circle forward and 2 attacks.
Lightning Storm!
Wonderful!
Hailstorm is done with the quarter circle back and 2 attacks. This is once again Storm's scariest super by far, just on the basis of how much chip it can do, especially in X Factor. In some situations, Storm can basically guarantee a win in 1v1 situations if she has enough meter in X Factor. Storm gets a new super here, Elemental Rage, done with a Dragon Punch motion in 2 attacks.
Wind! Come forth, wind!
Maximum!
Storm sends out a block of ice that bursts out of the ground. If it hits, the opponent is put into a cinematic attack. Where the ice spawns can actually be controlled by the player by holding an attack button during the move startup animation. The cinematic part of this super was actually really important in vanilla Marvel 3, as it made this move a prime candidate to initiate the DHC glitch. I'm not gonna put the Chris Who video here because I've done that joke already, but essentially, the DHC glitch allows you to reset damage and hit stun scaling mid-combo. Starting a combo and ending it with a cinematic non-level 3 super, and then DHCing into a super that doesn't hit the opponent will allow the character to continue a combo, but now the damage and hit stun scaling is reset, allowing for incredibly damaging combos, and in some cases, even touches of death. Some hyper combos that damage the opponent can be used to DHC into though, like Hyper Sentinel Force. Storm's first assist is Whirlwind. Her second assist is Double Typhoon. Her third assist is Lightning Attack.
Good luck.
Here are Storm's colors. Her second color is based off of her 1990s Jim Lee design, but you already knew that. Her third color is based on her appearance in X-Men Revolution, an X-Men storyline written by Claremont upon his brief return to X-Books in 2000. Her fourth color is a silver and black variant of her standard costume, worn by Storm when she and Black Panther joined the Fantastic Four for a short time, replacing Reed and Sue after the events of Civil War. Her fifth color comes from the Uncanny X-Men story Double Death, specifically issue 267 of Uncanny X-Men. Her sixth color is a shout out to her Goddess of Thunder form from New Mutants Special Edition issue 1, wherein Loki tricks Storm into wielding a weather controlling hammer named Stormcaster. Her alternate costume is her mohawk design from the 80s. This was her most prominent costume when she first led the team back then. Here are all of Storm's interactions.
I've defeated Ngara humans before, and I'll defeat you. Did Belasco send you, demon?
Belasco is a demon that tends to stir up trouble in the Marvel Universe. He's notably the demon responsible for the kidnapping and attempted corruption of Ileana Rasputin, better known as Magic.
Now you encounter real power.
Ready to seize mutant target.
It's do or die.
Terrifying monsters? Try being an X-Man. Will you never learn, Eric?
I grow weary of these encounters.
Get ready to brawl.
Perhaps now you realize your foolishness, Magnus. Guns and knives can only do so much against the force of nature.
Let's see how cute I am after I strangle you with your own intestines.
It's do or die.
I suddenly rejoice that there are no raccoons in Wakanda. A monstrosity such as yourself insults the very laws of nature.
Live and let die.
There is a reason I lead the X-Men.
Wanna try your luck against the Wolverine?
It's do or die.
Back to the danger room with you.
And here are her endings in both releases of Marvel 3. Storm is an iconic character, both in and out of Marvel vs. Capcom. Her absence from Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite really punctuated just how dire the whole roster situation was. It doesn't matter if you're a casual fan of the character, or someone like Justin Wong, who cited Storm as his favorite fighting game character of all time. Pretty much everyone loves her. Almost every time X-Men are adapted for video games, she's almost always involved somehow, and though I don't really play it, I hear she's raising hell in Marvel Rivals too, so yeah. In the event of another Marvel vs. Capcom game happening, I hope anyone hypothetically involved would know to include her. That's going to do it for this video. As always, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you next time.